The first thing I remember clearly is the ceiling. White tiles, fluorescent lights, that particular hum hospitals have that you feel more than hear. And a man leaning over me doing something to my wrist that I couldn't make sense of at first. "Hold still, sir. I need you to hold still." "What are you?" My voice came out wrong, scraped thin like a nail across concrete. "That's my bracelet. My son gave me that." The man paused. He was young, maybe 35, with the kind of steady hands and tired eyes you see on people who've spent too many nights in emergency rooms. He looked at me for a long moment. Not the way medical people usually look at you, cataloging symptoms, checking pupils. He looked at me like he was deciding something. Then he leaned in close and said quietly, so only I could hear, "Sir, that bracelet is why you're here. My name is Douglas Fairweather. I'm 69 years old. I spent 31 years as a land surveyor for the province of Ontario, most of it out in the field, Georgian Bay country, the Muskokas, up near Sudbury a few times in the winters that felt like they'd never end. I know how to read terrain. I know how to look at a landscape and understand what's underneath, what's hidden, what's been shaped by forces you can't see. I tell you that because I need you to understand why what happened to me is so hard to explain. I'm not a naive man. I'm not the kind of person who doesn't notice things, and it still happened to me. 30 years it took. 30 years of reading land and water and rock. And I couldn't read my own son. Let me take you back. It's easier if I start at the beginning, or what I thought was the beginning. Looking back now, the real beginning came much earlier, but I didn't know that then. It was the October before last, Thanksgiving weekend. My son drove up from Mississauga with his wife and their 2 kids. My place is a small house on the edge of Gravenhurst. Nothing fancy, a century home I've been fixing up slowly since my wife passed. 3 bedrooms, a wood stove in the living room, a dock out back where the lake comes right up to the property line on a good water year. My wife, Anne, died in the spring of 2021, pancreatic cancer, the kind that finds you and moves fast. We had 43 years together, most of them good. I won't say all of them because that's not true of any marriage, but the hard years were worth it, and both of us knew it, before she was gone. That's something. After she died, I rattled around in that house for longer than I should have. My daughter-in-law kept telling me to sell it, move somewhere smaller, get a condo in Barrie or Owen Sound where there were more people around. My son echoed her. "You're isolated up there, Dad. It's not good for you." I ignored them. The house is mine and Anne's, even now, even with her gone. Her garden still comes back every spring. Her reading chair is still beside the window. I'm not a sentimental man by most measures, but that house is the one place I don't have to explain myself. So Thanksgiving. The kids, my grandchildren, Lila who was 9 and Owen who was 6, they tore through the yard after dinner while my son and I sat on the back porch with our beers and watched the lake go dark at the edges. His wife was inside doing something on her phone. She's always doing something on her phone. He brought out a small box after the kids came in. Set it on the table in front of me like he was placing something fragile. "We wanted to get you something, Dad, something useful." Inside was a fitness tracker, one of those slim ones that wraps around the wrist and looks almost like a regular watch if you don't know what you're looking at. Black band, minimal face, no flashy brand name I recognized. "It monitors your heart, your sleep, your oxygen levels," he said. "There's an app. I can check in on you without having to call every 10 minutes. He smiled when he said it. That easy, practiced smile of his. His wife came out from inside right on cue. "We just worry about you being alone out there, Douglas. Especially through the winter. If something happened and you couldn't get to the phone." She pressed her hand to her chest. "I'd never forgive myself." I looked at my son. He was watching me with something I read at the time as concern, as love even. I thought about Anne, who used to call me stubborn as a fence post, who would have told me to put the damn thing on and stop making everything complicated. So I put it on. It fit perfectly. I should have thought about that later, how perfectly it fit. But I didn't. November passed quietly. I finished insulating the crawl space under the back addition, got the dock pulled in before freeze-up, stacked enough wood to get me through to February. The tracker sat on my wrist. I forgot about it most days. It was just there, measuring whatever it measured, sending whatever it sent to my son's phone in Mississauga. The headache started in December. I've had sinus trouble before, pressure headaches in the cold months when the furnace runs all day. I figured that's what it was, but these were different. They sat behind my eyes and radiated up into my skull, a dull, constant throb that Advil barely touched. I started sleeping badly, waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, heart going faster than it should, the sheets soaked through. My son called more after that, almost every day. The app showing your resting heart rate is elevated, Dad. Are you stressed about something? I'm fine, I told him. Your sleep data looks rough. Are you drinking enough water? I humored him. I drank more water. I went to bed earlier. The headaches didn't stop. I went to my family doctor in January, Dr. Abioy, who I've seen for 15 years, a calm, careful woman who doesn't rush. She ran blood work, checked my blood pressure, ordered an ECG. Everything came back within normal range for a man my age. You're 68 years old in a cold climate, Douglas, she said. Your body is going to have opinions. She suggested more movement, less caffeine, and a follow-up in the spring. I went home and tried to believe her. By February, the trembling had started. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing anyone else would notice. A fork that rattled slightly on the way to my mouth, a signature that didn't look quite like mine. I'd been signing my name the same way since I was 19 years old, and suddenly my hand felt like it belonged to someone else. My son called one morning and I could hear his wife in the background before he put her on. Douglas, we've been talking, she said. We really think you should see a specialist, a neurologist. My uncle knows someone at St. Michael's. We can set it up. Your uncle knows someone. They always know someone. I said I'd think about it. Then I said yes, because the trembling frightened me more than I wanted to admit. My mother had Parkinson's. I watched that illness take her apart over 7 years. The control leaving her piece by piece until she couldn't lift a cup. The thought of going that way, of losing the steadiness I'd built my whole working life around. It sat in my chest like a stone. The appointment was in March. I drove down to Toronto, which I hate, and sat in a waiting room full of people who all looked like they'd rather be somewhere else, which is true of every waiting room I've ever been in. The neurologist was a young man named Dr. Burris. Thorough, methodical, the kind of doctor who explains things in full sentences and waits to see if you have questions before moving on. He put me through a full battery. Cognitive tests, physical coordination, an MRI. When I came back for results, he sat across from me with his hands folded on his desk and used the word concerning. The imaging showed patterns consistent with early neurological changes. He didn't say Parkinson's. He didn't say Alzheimer's. He said the word decline very carefully, the way you'd handle something that might break. He prescribed medication. Small white capsules, twice daily with food. I drove back to Gravenhurst in the dark, which I shouldn't have done with my head in the state it was in. And I sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. My son and his wife drove up the following weekend. They were attentive in a way that should have felt like love, and instead felt like something I couldn't name. Like being watched by people who are very careful not to seem like they're watching. My daughter-in-law kept refilling my tea without being asked. My son kept finding reasons to stand near me, to touch my shoulder, to ask if I needed anything. On the second night there, I woke up at 3 in the morning with a headache bad enough to make me nauseous. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, and then I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink, running cold water over my wrists, the way Anne used to tell me to do when I couldn't sleep. The tracker on my wrist was warm. Not skin warm. Hot. The band against the inside of my wrist felt like it had been sitting in the sun. I stood there looking at it in the bathroom mirror. I told myself it was a battery running hot. I told myself I'd mention it to my son in the morning. I told myself it was nothing. Something at the back of my mind said otherwise. I pushed it away. I wasn't ready yet to look at what it was saying. I drove home after the weekend. The medication didn't help. April came, and with it something new. Fog. That's the only word for it. I'd be reading and realize I had no idea what I'd just read. I'd walk into a room and stop dead in the doorway. No memory of what I'd come in for. I'd sit down to pay a bill online and lose 20 minutes, just gone, like a gap in the record. One afternoon in late April, I drove into Gravenhurst for groceries. I've been shopping at the same store for over 20 years. I could walk the aisles with my eyes closed. When I came out with my bags, I stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes looking for my truck. It was parked right where I always park it. I'd just stopped being able to see it. I sat inside the cab for a long time after I found it. I didn't cry. I'm not built that way. But I sat there in the parking lot on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and I thought about Anne, and I thought about my mother, and I thought about what it might mean to disappear from yourself before your body stops working. My son called that evening. His voice was gentle, careful. Dad, the cognitive stuff is getting harder to ignore. We've been talking, and we really think. I know, I said. You could come stay with us. We have the space. We could convert the office. I'll think about it. I didn't sleep that night either. By May, I'd lost weight I didn't have to lose. My clothes didn't fit. I had no appetite, and food that I'd eaten my whole life suddenly tasted like I was chewing on nothing. Both friends stopped calling, and I stopped calling them back, and my world shrank down to the house and the lake and the phone calls from my son and the little white capsules I took twice a day with my meals. It was June when everything broke open. I'd gone into town to pick up a prescription refill. Walking back to the truck, I felt the world tilt sideways without warning. Not dizzy exactly, more like the ground decided to be somewhere other than where it was supposed to be. I caught the side mirror and held on, and someone walking past grabbed my arm and kept me upright. The woman who caught me was named Terry. She told me that afterward, in the waiting room at the Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare emergency entrance, where she drove me herself, insisting in a voice that left no room for argument. She was in her late 60s, gray hair and a braid, the kind of no-nonsense manner you get from people who've spent their lives being practical. You went gray like a piece of paper, she said. I wasn't about to just keep walking. In the emergency room, while a nurse was taking my vitals, a man came in to look at the equipment they'd connected to my wrist. Not the hospital equipment, my tracker. He was from the biomedical team, a technician named Ray Gaudette, and he'd been called in because one of the ER nurses had flagged something unusual on the monitoring readings when I was brought in. He looked at the tracker on my wrist and then looked at me and then back at the tracker. How long have you been wearing this? He asked. Since October, I said. He excused himself. He came back with a small device and held it near the tracker without touching it. He looked at the readout. Then he looked at me again. Sir, he said, I need to ask you something. Who gave you this? My son. His face did something careful and controlled that told me more than his words did. This device has been modified. It's emitting a low-level, non-ionizing radiation signal that's outside any approved range for consumer electronics. It's not enough to. He paused. It's the kind of exposure that over months produces exactly the symptoms listed in your file. The world went very still. I thought about the tracker fitting perfectly. I thought about Dr. Burris and his careful word, decline. I thought about the little white capsules. The medication, I said, the prescription from my neurologist. Ray looked at me for a moment. Then he went and got someone else. The capsules weren't what they were supposed to be. A toxicology screen that the ER physician ordered, partly to rule things out, came back showing trace accumulation of compounds that had no business being in a prescription neurological medication. Sedative compounds. Something else that took the lab longer to identify. I lay in that hospital bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling tiles and thinking about my son. Not the man who drove up to Mississauga with his 2 kids every Thanksgiving. Not the man who called every morning to check on my heart rate data. I thought about a boy who used to follow me around job sites on weekends, asking questions about everything, who wanted to know how the instruments worked, how we knew where the property lines were, how you could measure something you couldn't see. I thought about all the ways I'd answered those questions, and how proud I was of him. Then I thought about a house worth close to $600,000 in today's market. A pension I paid into for 31 years. RRSP accounts, a small inheritance from Anne's parents that we'd never touched. I thought about my daughter-in-law's hand pressed to her chest. I'd never forgive myself. Ray Godet came back and sat with me that evening after his shift ended. He told me he'd been looking into cases like mine on his own time. He'd seen something similar 2 years before, a woman in North Bay who'd been given a modified air quality monitor by her stepchildren. She didn't make it to the investigation. He brought me information. Not enough to be proof, enough to point in a direction. I made a phone call that night. Not to my son. To a lawyer I'd used for the property survey business years ago, a woman I trusted, who I knew would be careful and quick and ask the right questions. Then I called an old colleague from the provincial office, who knew people in law enforcement. Then I lay there in the dark and thought about what I was going to do next. What I did was this. I called my son the following morning, and I let my voice be thin and confused. I told him I'd had another episode, that the doctors were talking about transferring me somewhere with more specialized care, that I was scared. He was quiet for a moment. "We'll come up, Dad. We'll come up this weekend." I think. I paused. The way I'd been pausing lately when I wanted him to believe my mind was slipping. "I think you were right about the house. About me being up here alone." His intake of breath was very small, but I heard it. "Don't worry about anything," he said. "We'll figure it all out when we get there." "I love you," I told him. He said it back without hesitation. Maybe he meant it. I've spent a lot of time since then trying to figure out if that makes it better or worse, and I still don't have an answer. They arrived on a Saturday morning. He was driving. His wife sat in the passenger seat with a folder on her lap that I watched her tuck into her bag as they got out of the car. I found out later it was paperwork for power of attorney over my financial affairs. 2 plainclothes officers from the OPP were parked down the road. A forensic team was already at their house in Mississauga. I watched from the window. My son came up the porch steps with a coffee from Tim Hortons in each hand, the way he'd been doing since he was 17 and thought it was a way to start hard conversations on better ground. His wife was just behind him, already talking, already filling the air with words. The officers met them at the bottom of the porch steps. I watched my son's face change. The coffee cup stayed in his hands for a moment, then one of them hit the boards of the porch. The lid came off, and the coffee went across the old wood I'd refinished the summer after Anne died. He looked up at the window and saw me standing there. I don't know what he expected to see. Maybe a confused old man. Maybe someone who'd already started to disappear. What he saw was me. All of me. Steady. His wife started crying immediately. My son didn't. He just stood there looking at me through the glass. And for a moment he looked like that boy again. The one who used to want to know how you measure something you can't see. Then the moment was over. The investigation ran through the autumn. What it found was thorough and ugly. The tracker had been purchased through a third-party seller and modified before it was ever packaged as a gift. The capsules had been substituted. My son had access to the prescription information through the health app, had known the medication name and dosage, had arranged for a replacement supply through someone his wife knew from her work in pharmaceutical distribution. The life insurance policy they'd taken out on me, without my knowledge, using a broker they'd found and a policy I'd never signed, was worth just under $900,000. 31 years of surveying, pension, the house, the RRSP, Anne's inheritance money. Add the insurance. They'd worked out the math carefully. The trial was in the spring. I sat in that courtroom for 11 days and listened to people describe my son's actions in legal language that flattened everything into procedure and intent and calculated harm. His wife's lawyer argued she was a secondary participant, that she'd been led by him, that her role was peripheral. The jury didn't fully agree. He received 22 years, first-degree attempted murder, criminal fraud, conspiracy. She received 14. Both of them will be in their 50s before they have any real chance at a life outside. Leela and Owen went to live with my daughter-in-law's sister in Guelph. She's a decent woman. I've spoken to her a few times. She sends me photos occasionally. The kids at Halloween, Owen's school play, Lila at a hockey game with her team. The kids send me drawings sometimes, the way kids do. A house. A lake. A stick figure with gray hair standing on a dock. I write back. I keep the letters simple. I tell them about the weather and the garden and what the lake looks like this time of year. I don't mention their parents. That story belongs to them, and they'll carry it in their own time, in whatever way they can. Dr. Urs cooperated fully with the investigation once the evidence was in front of him. He'd been deceived too, given falsified test results and manipulated imaging data that had been interfered with before they reached his desk. He didn't lose his license. He's the one who actually helped the investigation understand the medical timeline, so his cooperation meant something. The toxicologist who identified the compounds in the capsules testified for 4 hours. I understood about a third of what she said. I still live in the house in Gravenhurst. I know people expected me to leave, sell it, move on, put the whole geography of the thing behind me. But this is Anne's garden and my dock, and the particular quality of light over this lake in October that I've never seen anywhere else. The house doesn't belong to what my son did. It belongs to 30 years of something real, and I'm not going to let what happened rewrite that. My health came back slowly. The trembling stopped by August. The fog lifted in pieces, a bit more each month, until one day I realized I'd read an entire chapter without losing my place, and I sat there with the book open on my lap and felt something I hadn't felt in almost 2 years, like myself. Ray Gadet drives up from Huntsville a few times a year. He's got a family. 3 kids, a wife who teaches at the elementary school there. The first time he came up, he brought his youngest, who spent the whole afternoon trying to catch frogs off the dock. I watched that kid and thought about Owen at that age and let myself feel that, without turning away from it. There's a woman I've been getting to know. Her name is Caroline. We met at a grief support group in Bracebridge that I started going to after Anne died, and then stopped, and then started again. She lost her husband 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. She has 2 grown daughters. She talks to every day on the phone. She gardens. We've walked the waterfront trail in Gravenhurst a few times, and once drove out to Bala for lunch and sat by the water and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with grief or betrayal or any of this. Just 2 people getting acquainted. The ordinary pleasure of that. I'm not in a hurry. Neither is she. That feels right. I bought a new watch in September. A Timex. The kind that costs $40 and doesn't connect to anything. It has a plain white face and a brown leather band and that tells the time, which is all a watch needs to do. I look at it sometimes and I think about the 41 years I spent building something with Anne, a life, a house, a family, a set of memories I can walk through like rooms. I think about how close I came to losing all of it, not just her, not just the years ahead, but the meaning I'd made of everything behind me. If I died of a natural decline in the winter or the spring, the story would have been simple and sad and wrong. A widower, alone in a rural property, deteriorating. No investigation, no questions, no one looking at a fitness tracker and thinking to ask. I think about that sometimes. About how easy it almost was. I also think about Terry, who grabbed my arm in a parking lot in Gravenhurst because she was the kind of person who doesn't keep walking when someone needs help. I never got her last name. I went back to that block of Main Street twice and didn't find her. I hope she knows, wherever she is, that she's part of why I'm still here. If you're watching this from somewhere in Canada, somewhere cold and gray, or somewhere the snow is coming, I want to say something to you. Pay attention to the gifts you're given. Not because people are not to be trusted. Most people can be trusted, but the ones who can't are very good at looking like the ones who can. And love is not proof of anything except that someone once felt something. What someone once felt and what someone will do are different questions. Pay attention to your body. It knows things before your mind is ready to hear them. That tracker was on my wrist for 8 months. My body was sending distress signals from the 2nd month. I explained every one of them away. Ask the uncomfortable questions, the ones that feel disloyal, that feel like an insult to someone you love. Ask them anyway. Silence is not kindness when the thing you're staying silent about is whether you're going to be alive in 6 months. I'm 69 years old. I'm a retired land surveyor and a widower and a grandfather and a man who nearly died of trusting the wrong person with the wrong piece of technology and not asking enough questions at the right time. I'm also still here, and this morning the lake was flat and silver in the early light, and the maples along the shore were going red at the edges. And I stood on my dock with my coffee, and I thought about Anne the way I do most mornings, and I thought, good. Another day. Let's see what it holds. That's enough. That's more than enough.